Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending upon where you are. This is John Manna from CDW. And while we're getting ready to kick this thing off, I'll share a little bit of background for some folks that may be newer to these sessions. So, CDW for the past 2 years have been doing roughly a monthly educational webinar focused on ServiceNow, focused on driving more value out of the platform. So it's very ROI focused, but also talking a lot about the people and process side of the equation. And those sessions, by the way, as you've all got an invite to this one. So if you're interested in seeing kind of those past sessions and looking at seeing recording sessions of that, happy to get that to you as well. But we do want to thank you for joining here. Today's session is it's an important session, right? And we'll talk a little bit in a moment about what that focus is for everybody, right? So it's the the new rules that came out from the SEC around risk management, right? Specifically incident disclosure. And while that may seem like it applies really to just publicly traded companies or organizations that literally have to adhere to that, the thought here is even for organizations that might not be required by law to kind of align, um, the spirit of it, right, is still something that's of interest from a best practice perspective. So we're going to take a look at, hey, what those rules all are about, why they are there, what they're designed to protect. We'll talk about some of the challenges around kind of getting up to speed with that, and focus a lot on the people and process side. But fortunately as well, we're going to be able to talk about the technology side, right? How can we leverage things like technology, whether it's software, whether it's platform, to help us align to those things, right? So excited about the speakers we've got today. So let me introduce them and give you a quick summary. So Larry Burke, he's going to kind of kick things off for us. He's part of CDW specifically. Larry is someone who is a strategist for us from a global security perspective. So he's going to kind of set the table and kind of get us all on the same page in terms of what this really means, why we care, and some of the things we can do about it. Really excited to have our partner here, Ryan Foster from ServiceNow. He's going to talk a little bit about ServiceNow's perspective of this, and of course, with that, kind of dovetail into how the platform, of ServiceNow can help get aligned to this, help mitigate the risk, and help organizations comply. Again, whether you legally need to comply, or whether you're simply looking at what is the industry aligning towards and why, and seeing which parts of that might be good for your organization. And then, of course, we're going to close with some thoughts from CDW, right? We've got a ServiceNow solutions practice here, and Rahimi, our portfolio manager for this space, wants to share a little bit about what we're doing with our clients from a process perspective, how we're helping those organizations kind of pull all of this together. The things you're going to hear from Larry, the things you're going to hear from Ryan, we'll put a bow on it with some specific kind of thoughts, suggestions of where do you go from here. So with all that being said, we're going to be happy to take questions. If you do have questions, the suggestion is that you use the Q&A section of the WebEx meeting tool, and we'll do our best to kind of fit in as many questions as we can at the end of the session. And if we don't get to those questions at the end, we'll certainly follow up with you separately, shoot you a note, and hopefully answer that for you. So that's the table set. Larry, I'm going to turn the mic over to you and let you kick things off for the team.
All right, thank you, John. And just a double check with the team, everyone can see our slides.
You're good.
And so as John alluded to, we're going to talk about cybersecurity disclosure rules. And these rules were issued by the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. They apply to public companies, and they were issued in July of this year. This was the result of a comment period that went to over a year. And as you can imagine, the final rules are different than what was proposed, but still causing a lot of companies concern around, do they have the right people, the processes, and the systems in place to be able to address the new requirements that have been issued by the SEC. So over the next few slides, I'm going to share with you what their expectations are and share with you some tips and examples of what to think about. ServiceNow is a very strong system along with processes that we think will be beneficial to a lot of companies as they start to adapt into this new requirement. So first of all, we got to understand why the SEC did this. And there have been disclosure requirements in the past, but the SEC felt that investors were really not getting consistent and timely information. The prior rules were not being adhered to in a consistent manner, therefore leading to investors not getting the information that the SEC felt that they needed to make good investment decisions. And cybersecurity, as we've seen, is mission critical for organizations. When you have a failure in a cybersecurity situation, you could lose revenues, your business could be interrupted, you could have product delays, you might have to pay ransomware, you might have to spend a lot of money fixing the systems that were disrupted, you may be subject to litigation and legal risk, there may be harm to customers, to employees, and ultimately this could lead to an investment in that company reducing its value, loss of competitiveness, long-term shareholder value destruction. Remember, the SEC is focused on requiring companies to disclose information that is relevant to them, material information. And so this now sets a stake in the ground that says companies have to disclose information to investors on a periodic basis. The rule is really split into kind of two different types of disclosures: an annual disclosure in the Form 10-K, and that disclosure is really around the risk management and strategy that companies use around cybersecurity. And then the second piece is around the governance over that cybersecurity, starting at the board level. So starting with 10-Ks, beginning for fiscal year 2023, you'll start to see those 10-Ks come out in the next few months as companies report for their December 31st year end. You'll see a new disclosure under item 1, where companies will talk about how they assess and identify material risks from cybersecurity threats, and then how they address those risks. They'll also talk about how boards oversee cybersecurity and help management understand and make sure they're comfortable with management's role and response. And this now takes us to the second element of the rule, and this is around incident reporting. And incident reporting has been a hot button topic with the SEC. If a company has a material cyber incident, they're required to report it according to this rule within 4 days of that determination. Here's what they need to disclose: the nature, timing, and scope of the incident, and the impact or likely impact on that particular incident. If they've already disclosed an incident and they have new information, they're going to be required to update that information. So this is considered the 8K reporting piece. There was a 10K, and then this is the 8K. 8K is an ad hoc reporting based on facts and circumstances. And there's two things I wanted to highlight for the audience here. Number one, the SEC defines cybersecurity incident. And it talks about an unauthorized occurrence or series of related unauthorized occurrence through the registrant's information systems. Now, a lot of times you might think of that as the systems that I own, but then the SEC generously defines information systems. And this is what I wanted to highlight. Those are resources owned or used by a registrant. That pulls in third-party systems. So a lot of companies today we know use outsourced service providers or third parties to help with the conduct of their business. By explicitly defining this, this comes into scope. And therefore, companies need to not only be aware of what's happening internally on their systems, but any third-party systems that are critical to their business. One issue that we've talked a lot about with our clients over the past several months since these rules have been finalized is about materiality. Remember, if it's an incident and it's immaterial, you don't need to disclose. But if it's material, you do. And the concept of materiality is pretty familiar for financial reporting. But when it comes to cybersecurity, it's less clear what's material, what's not material. So we wanted to share with you just a couple of thoughts around it. The lens that companies should use is whether a reasonable investor getting new information would make a different decision based on the total mix of information available. And so companies now have to go through a process where they must be able to assess an incident through that lens. And it should be through the eyes of a reasonable investor. So that means the assessment has to be objective. It's not a mechanical exercise. Some companies want to just say, well, if it's below a certain dollar threshold, a quantitative threshold, it's not material. But the SEC clearly says that's not the case. You got to look at qualitative and quantitative factors, and you got to look at all relevant facts and circumstances without bias. That is something that we've had a lot of discussions around our clients, helping them give them a framework around how to think about that. Materiality is a legal concept. It's been established by the courts. The most famous case is TSC versus Northway. It's talking about a reasonable shareholder would draw from a given set of facts and circumstances and the significance of those inferences if information was provided. If we want to understand a little bit more about materiality, the SEC issued Staff Accounting Bulletin 99. You can go to the SEC website and search for that. It's free to the public, and you can read that. And it talks about there is no bright line test. It's not a quantitative analysis. You got to look at qualitative and quantitative factors. Similar to what you do as a public company when you evaluate whether a significant deficiency or deficiencies aggregate to become a material weakness. Here's some guidance we've shared with our clients about how you can have a decision matrix around whether an incident is material or not. And it's essentially a cascading decision tree. We start out, once that incident is identified, does it meet internal policies around being critical or not? If it is, then you might want to go to what kind of data is involved. Is it regulated data? Does the organization experience downtime? Is it a critical outsourced service provider that's impacted? Are contractual obligations that are material impacted? If any one of these are yes, then we would encourage you to have a discussion with your general counsel or whoever else is responsible in your organization around assessing whether material items need to be disclosed. Clorox, some people may be aware, had an incident. They went and disclosed it in their 8K, and you can see they had 3 different updates, starting in August, then in September, then in October. And what that tells us is this is before the requirement forcibly came into effect. So they're an early adopter, and you can see what they disclose. You can also go to their website and pull their 8K. But it talks about what they have identified, unauthorized activity, and then they've taken steps to remediate it. And they believe that the activity is contained. They subsequently updated their information disclosures to their investors. They did have an impact to their stock price and other impacts, including changes at upper level of management, including some of their executive CISO folks. But what is important is that they took the initiative to disclose this, and we're starting to see this now. More and more disclosures. The rules become effective in the next few weeks for most companies. And as a result, the goal is to be prepared, to have the systems and processes in place. And that's really where ServiceNow can help. And so with that, it's the implications of these new rules, meaning that you got to start with your risk assessments. You've got to have prompt response procedures. You got to know where the regulations that apply to you. You've got to be able to update your investors and your board members. And your outsourced service providers will also receive additional scrutiny. In a lot of organizations, this is contained in disparate systems and processes, and different people are involved. The goal is to have a better centralized process. And I think that's kind of a nice segue, really, Ryan, for you to talk about what ServiceNow is able to do given these requirements, especially the timeliness around that disclosure.
Perfect. Thank you, Larry. I appreciate it and wanted to thank CDW for having us in the webinar today. We appreciate it. CDW is a wonderful organization with a depth of expertise to help folks understand how these concepts can be applied to help solve the problem. And so with that kind of context, my name is Ryan Foster. Again, I'm a security specialist here with ServiceNow. One of the things you know in my background, I started 20 years ago or more than 20 years ago as an EMT. And so I take a pragmatic approach with regards to understanding and trying to help solve some of these problems. And so in context of the SEC mandate, right, we can't control as IT and security professionals if our organization is cyber breached. It's outside of our control. But as an IT professional, as a security professional, what we can do is be prepared. And just as the case is working in the emergency room, right? You have a team of individuals, we drill, we plan, and we hope for the best that that problem isn't going to walk through the door, such as a cyber breach. But again, there's methodologies we can employ to solve that problem in a systematic fashion so that we can make the best of the given situation. So with that, you want to move to the next screen, Larry? So first we need to understand what is it, the problem that we're trying to solve? What are the expectations on us as an IT and security team? And again, at a highest level, our board has a set of expectations that we need to be able to articulate to those third parties to help them understand that we do have a methodology, we do have a process. And what I try to do is boil this down into your basic concepts of, do we have a methodology? Do we understand what questions need to be addressed of us? And can we do all these things within the context of that 4-day window that's outlined for this SEC mandate, if again, our organization determines if it's material or not? This gives you kind of a rough outline with regards to many of those kind of key concepts as it relates to both internal parties and external parties. Because again, we need to help our organization determine, is this material? What is the scope? And supporting them in that process, can we articulate and structure that information to our external organizations, to our external auditors, the SEC, and describe what our statefulness is so that they feel comfortable and confident that we have a process in place that understands and allows us to move this process forward in describing and addressing if that cyber breach does occur. Next slide, Larry. This is an oversimplification of that team approach. Right? This is a team sport. So security, IT, and risk are how we've kind of oversimplified the three kind of core focus organizations that would be involved in this process of responding to this type of requirement. Right? The incident response process, the methodology, we use the term playbook, which is we have a structured approach in context of this type of cyber breach, and a methodology of what data sets are captured, how we apply, who we engage with, how we move through the process of eradicating that, and then notifying and engaging the myriad of downstream teams, in this context, legal teams, the executives, and also external folks to help them understand what actions we've taken and timelines and expectations with regards to our steps in that process. Obviously, a close partnership in that is the IT operations team, because they actually own all that IT infrastructure, and supporting them if any systems from my outage perspective, a business continuity perspective, is impacted as a result of this related cyber breach, and supporting them and sharing information so that we can provide the most holistic perspective about our statefulness as we're navigating and trying to bring that incident to a state of closure. And of course, the risk organization, right? From a policy perspective, controls perspective, having that structure pre-organized so that we can understand how has that related breach impacted the different systems, which systems are critical, and how that is being managed in real time with regards to the controls and the risk rating that we assign to our overall statefulness. Now, if you want to move to the next slide, Larry. A core concept, if you are or are not familiar with ServiceNow, we have a kind of an approach, which is if you can see where that data set and the relationships are, then you can act upon them. So that concept is what is enabling us to support that objective of responding to this respective cyber breach within that 4-day window. Some of the core structural aspects of ServiceNow, if you want to move to the next slide, Larry, is this concept that all the data sets are commingled in one location with our single data model that allows the relationships between our IT organization, between security, between risk, between HR, all of those interrelationships are predefined on day one. And what that enables us to do is allows a logical sharing of that data set across the different functional organizations, enabling you to collect the data set once and apply it many times, such that, again, addressing this SEC mandate and this disclosure requirement is just one use case that can be addressed because this model enables that cross-sharing of that data set. You want to move to the next slide, Larry? This gives you another kind of a holistic perspective from a security lens of all of the other data sources that might be brought together to support the investigative effort associated with a cyber breach. In the different boxes, you see a myriad of integrations that exist of tools that are used by the different functional security teams. The upper left, the SOC organization is going to be more involved with the detection of the SIM component. The vulnerability team in the lower left-hand side use a different set of tools. And you can see the orchestration component on the far right-hand side. The summation of this is not only is there a data set that ServiceNow is collecting, but we're also bringing in data sets from a myriad of other sources to bring together a cohesive and single perspective that then can be shared from the security team, but out into these other organizations to support the decision-making process for the teams, regardless of the type of event that needs to be addressed. Larry, you want to move to the next slide? And when you have all of this data in one place from IT and risk and from security, this allows you to answer some very interesting macro organizational level questions that the executives would like to know. If you just had silos of security data, IT data, and risk data, you would be locked into having perspectives that are siloed to those functional groups. ServiceNow removes the silos so that you can have that organizational level context with regards to the problem sets you have at hand. Again, as you see this is what we refer to as the CIO dashboard module. It's a free module that we have. It populates automatically as data set is brought onto that platform, whether that's collected by ServiceNow or is brought in from a third-party tool via an integration standpoint. These are some of the mechanisms that we support the fulfillment of that 4-day recording requirement from an SEC mandate standpoint, because we can bring the visibility to any type of problem that is at hand to support the decision makers to understand, is it material? What systems has it impacted? And then what are the sequence of steps via these playbooks to support us moving through that mitigation process? With that, again, Larry, next slide. And then, of course, the element that has been spoken about highly from last year, it's one of the elements that brought me to ServiceNow back in 2020, is that the concept of using information to support that decision-making process. There's a myriad of AI-related components that are sitting in the background, doing work, supporting the decision-making process, whether we're engaged with it in real time or not. It's something that, because of all of the structured data that we have and unstructured data, right, with our interactions in the problem-solving process, we're able to use these tools and systems to solve the problem as quickly and as efficiently as is possible at the time. Again, going back to, can you respond in 4 days? On the ServiceNow platform, if you've done the work, gone through the thought process, the answer is yes, you can. I think we're now going to pivot back over to Rami to talk about, how do you get from the start right, from your current starting point? Because again, some folks are on ServiceNow, some people are not on ServiceNow. What's the process? What's the best path to enable your organization to play that team sport, which is required to support, again, this latest SEC mandate related objective? So Rami, I'll pass the baton over to you.
Thanks, Ryan. Welcome, everyone. My name is Rahimila Rahimi. I'm the portfolio manager at CDW, focused on SecOps for ServiceNow. You go on to the next slide. Just a quick overview. ServiceNow is one of the leading partners CDW is one of the leading ServiceNow partners. It's been actually a partner since 2013. At the same time, it's also been a customer, so really deep knowledge and experience from both an implementer and a customer side. Obviously, great CSAT scores and a depth of knowledge and experience from a variety of technology partners based on CDW's large portfolio of partners that they work with. This is really where you get the advantage with working with CDW because you have this full stack approach to all the various technologies, and then at the same time, experience in terms of how you get true digital transformation. As we go through this, we're going to look at more of a detailed approach to what are some of the components we want to look at, and then kind of going and discussing how we would implement some of that. So if you go to the next slide. Awesome. So, as Ryan had mentioned earlier, this is like a rough framework of an example of how you would approach deploying or implementing for the SEC mandate. This is a quick overview of a potential way you would deploy it out. If you go to the next slide, we'll start to focus on really the first part, which is finding out if you had an incident happen and how would you approach it. Really, starting out looking at it from a security operations perspective, there's an incident that's created. You're figuring out, okay, does this meet the requirements for a materiality, and then figuring out, okay, what do you need to do next? If you workflow it out within the SecOps tool, you'll be able to leverage some of the workflows and automation and capabilities. So building out some of these playbooks that help trigger some of these workflows after you've made a determination of what you need to do. This will get you into figuring out, okay, do we need to contain this? Is there a resolution that we can approach and attack, and figuring out how to best treat or treat this particular threat? And then obviously there's the communication component into it where you're letting all the stakeholders know what's going on and where you're at, and then accordingly sharing out some of the reports and capabilities. If you go on to the next slide, you'll see that it's really about again, going back to the automated workflows and leveraging automation. Here you can see that, okay, from an IT operations perspective, once we have discovered or figured out that, hey, there is a material breach, we need to start making sure we bring operations back. What are some of those components, right? So like, the business continuity planning, do you have some disaster response programs in place, and then leveraging obviously like ServiceNow's BCM tool to help guide some of that stuff. Are there patching that needs to get done that's been identified as part of the breach that helps remediate the problem? Again, leveraging ServiceNow's vulnerability management tool for an example of assigning some of those vulnerabilities that need to get patched. Again, and you're continuing to drive the communication across everyone that's involved and making sure stakeholders are aware of what's going on. If you go over to the next slide. Continuing with the theme of leveraging workflows and coordination, here you'll leverage, for example, the GRC component of risk and compliance. You're looking for, have you properly identified what is being impacted? How are those related to some of the compliance requirements that you have? Is there a policy that needs to be either updated or tracked in order to make sure you're following regulatory requirements? As mentioned before, if you don't even have the regulatory requirements, this still is very good best practice in terms of making sure you have great automated and efficient systems in place, right? So this would be about like evidence collection, risk assessment, and then just a general regulatory response approach. Again, going back to the main theme, which is making sure everybody is being properly looped in and has a sense of what's going on, and then sharing that information across the board. Go to the next slide. Fundamentally, this should all help to get you to that meeting of the 4-day requirement for making knowing if you need to disclose and having that notification sent out, and then obviously the required reporting and any other information that'll be around it. So it's not just, hey, we've been breached, or hey, we've had an incident. It's more of, well, we've had an incident. Here's how we've covered it. Here are the reports to show that we went through these audits. Here is how we have fixed some of these key components. Here's how we're going to avoid it next time. Here are some of the key reports that cover these various components. Next part. Back to the services from CDW. So a lot of it, as I mentioned, there's a lot of components to this, and really what you're looking at is you want to be able to implement the security incident response module, particularly the major incident security management tool. And also some of the threat intelligence capabilities to figuring out what and how that impacts your existing infrastructure. And in doing so, you get a lot of data enrichment. Again, vulnerability response is also a key player in this entire ecosystem and how you would deploy out the workflows. Next slide, please. Back to the IRM capabilities and the BCM, as I mentioned before, the business continuity management. You want to be able to have your, disaster recovery plans implemented as part of that workflow so that you have a way to, again, react properly and have it documented throughout the processes. We mentioned IRM, which is the GRC component of compliance and regulation, and getting those audit capabilities in place. Stuff that we didn't see in the workflow but would make sense is also some of the stuff that Ryan and Larry had mentioned, such as like third-party risk management. How do we do some vendor risk assessments and apply that into the intelligence and the monitoring of that? Is there any privacy stuff that we need to cover as well through like IRM modules that are around like privacy case management? Go to the next slide, please. And if you look here, most cases, if you are new and you're deploying, there's a systematic approach that we have in terms of how you would deploy a new ServiceNow implementation. Obviously, we have industry best practices and how we approach and deploy. And at the same time, we've been, as I mentioned before, a long-term partner, a trusted advisor to a large set of customers already. And for existing customers, this is a great approach to looking at, okay, well, if we want to get to a certain location, how do we get there? Obviously, starting out with some type of an assessment, baselining where you're at, and then moving into enhancement and adoption and figuring out what you need. This really is about like tailoring for your needs, and at the same time using best practices, industry known approaches for getting the best out of what you need. Next slide. I think, John?
Yeah, Rahimi, I think we've gotten ourselves to a point of some questions here. So thanks for the team to kind of bring us through that. And of course, in a short session like this, hopefully we've touched on enough things there to kind of get discussions going, but also provide some practical guidance. We do have some questions. First off, and I'm going to try to combine a few questions that I saw into one here. Ultimately, right? Which parts of the ServiceNow platform or which applications, are the ones that are going to help us here? And maybe we start first with assuming for a moment all a client has is the ITSM stack. What parts of that application can help here? And then what additional parts of the platform, that we referenced today perhaps would potentially need to be in place?
I'll let Rahimi have context on the ITSM one. The ones that, again, that are specifically focused on instant response as it relates to a cybersecurity related incident, and then the methodology to engage organizations within your team that are outside of security, that falls under the umbrella of security incident response. specifically with the major security incident management function. So again, that's the general umbrella. That module leverages IT data that is collected by the IT operations management module. And then, of course, from a risk compliance perspective, our integrated risk management. But the takeaway, like I said, I kind of take a pragmatic approach. People are at different phases in their adoption of this platform. What the takeaway is for the team here is that this is a board level. Your executive team has to figure out, how are we going to answer these questions for the SEC? And so at the highest echelons within your organization, they need to figure out, like, with the tools that we have ITSM, we don't have these other components. How can I take this presentation, conversations with CDW, and try to stitch together the data set that's required to get from, hey, we had an event, we've determined its material, we need to send something to the SEC. If you have ITSM, that's going to give you part of that equation. If you have the security module, that's going to give you another part of the equation. We're trying to help the team understand, like, how can we get you from 0 to SEC response as efficiently as possible, regardless of one or many of the modules within the ServiceNow ecosystem do. And again, that's what CDW is so excellent about, is understanding, interpreting, and help you figure out what is the shortest distance in your environment to get that done.
Yeah.
Defer to Rahimi if you want to build on that.
No, I think that's a good breakdown. Do you want me to cover the CMDB question?
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea, because I think it does segue a little bit into the other question, right? ITSM by itself, right? One of the things that we're going to talk about, and yeah, Raheem, if you can kind of take that CMDB one and the CMDB question. By the way, just for everybody in the organization, we have a couple of questions posted around the CMDB and its role, and the fact that often CMDBs, right, configuration management database, is not 100% accurate, not 100% complete. What do we do about that? So yeah, Amy, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, I think it's like a sports metaphor, right? Which is, your goal is perfection, and in the pursuit of perfection, excellence is achieved, right? So I think a lot of folks are in the same space where they're trying to keep a great CMDB, and may not think they have the best one at the moment. But again, it's a mixture of using ITOM, ITAM. VR, for example, is another one that has some great capabilities to enhance and increase the quality of your CMDB. It's a mixture of processes, people, and tools, right? So if you have, like, for example, your vulnerability response is doing scans, it finds CIs that are not in the CMDB. Do you have a process in place where you are working with your CMDB team and saying, okay, these are unidentified CIs we found in our environment. What do we do? How do we assign it? Other cases are obviously where you find CIs and they're not labeled correctly, or they're mislabeled. How are you working with that team and building out what I call CMDB hygiene practices? And so I think there's an approach to it. And so saying that, hey, the CMDB is not ready doesn't really stop you, right? It's in essence, you can improve it by building out some of these practices. So I hope that answered your question.
Yep.
Yeah, let me chime in on the other question about Dave, about the lost or stolen data bearing assets, or donated to schools or churches. The question is a material incident. So there was an enforcement action against Morgan Stanley, came out about a year ago, 2 years ago. And it's interesting, they had a bunch of assets. They hired a third party to dispose of, let's call them hardware drives. Third party engaged another third party. And they were supposed to wipe the drives and then dispose of them. What ended up happening was John Doe bought a drive off of eBay, opened up the drive and said, oh my gosh, it looks like there's customer information from Morgan Stanley on the drive. They could tell from the records on the drive. The SEC got involved. Other organizations got involved. Morgan Stanley was fined $35 million for not overseeing its third-party vendors, who didn't oversee its third-party vendors per its policy. They're required as part of the requirements as an investment advisor. So coming back to that question, nothing wrong with donating assets to schools or churches, but do you have a policy? Going back to that CMDB question, if you're donating assets, do you know what data is on them? And most importantly, have you sanitized them? Have you wiped those drives, which should be part of your policy? And then you can check off in the CMDB, these assets have been retired. If you don't have those things in place, that could be a significant incident and subject to regulatory fines and penalties. At the current rate, I think Morgan is up to about 100 million of fines and penalties between various federal and state agencies, including New York.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. And I've got one more comment I want to make to everyone on this call and kind of offer something up. And then Larry, maybe I'll ask you to close with, because I know your team here at CDW, your team helps our clients with assessments and roadmaps and things along those lines. And maybe you can close with just a comment or two on what that process looks like for organizations that are looking for some guidance, not just on this, but on some larger things. But I'll say specific to this and this session we did today, if you're a CDW customer, you have access to these resources, the folks that you heard speak today, for a lunch and learn. If you want to have a session like this tailored for your organization, getting together with us to kind of learn a little bit about where you are, capabilities, challenges, and continue this kind of think tank discussion around helping you guys get ready for this, just reach out and let us know, right? You're a CDW customer. These are the kinds of resources you have access to. And I'm going to throw Mr. Foster from ServiceNow into that pool of resources. We're here to help. Specifically, though, for this topic, Larry, if you want to just share a little bit about what we're doing for other clients in this whole kind of, assessment and road mapping, part of what we do.
Thanks, John. So since the SEC rules came out, clients have asked us, do we have our ducks in a row? Are we ready? And if not, can you help us get ready? Tell us where we've got gaps, what we got to work on, both on the 8K disclosures as well as the regular kind of 10K program governance. And so we've helped clients assess their current state and then provide recommendations where they need to mature to be able to describe that. And I think it's important if we go back, and this is, I think, the beauty of having a ServiceNow as a solution. If we go back to what we need to disclose here, we talk about first piece, your risk management strategy and governance. In the IRM module, where you start with risk and then you kind of cascade it throughout the organization, a lot of organizations do very manual type risk assessments, and then they'll map the risk to the controls, and then you got to figure out where your assets are. Different systems, disparate systems, it becomes a bit of a spaghetti process. And they struggle with that. The strength, and I think value add of ServiceNow is it's all in one location. Maybe you don't have every module deployed, but you have some of the key ones, and then it makes it much easier to report and describe on a periodic basis what your governance program is, where it's going. Similarly, when you have to get to incident response reporting, you've got really 4 days to get this information out there. And to do that, you need to know where the assets are, what type of incident, and you got to have that decision process. The workflows that ServiceNow has in place, centralize and standardize that, especially when you're working an incident that could be material, makes it much easier. So that's one of the things that we go in when we do our assessments. Do you have it? Are we in the Excel kind of Flintstone-ish world? Or are you migrating towards a more robust, holistic approach from a systems perspective? And our clients recognize more and more the value of having a single pane of glass, a single source of truth throughout what we call your cybersecurity governance program. And so everybody on this call is available to talk to us and share with you our perspectives. And we also recognize that today the SEC is pretty activist. For those that don't know, the CISO of SolarWinds was charged by the SEC in a complaint. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. We'll do another webinar. So ask your CDW seller. I think it'll be entertaining because everybody, not just the CISO, but the office of the CISO, is on the hook for making sure, if you're in a public company, that you know where your cybersecurity posture is, where your risks are, where your controls are, and how you can report them timely. The SEC doesn't say you have to be perfect in cybersecurity, but it does say you have to tell your investors what your risks are and where you stand if you have a material incident. And so with that, John, I'll pass it back to you, and we're almost at our wrap.
I think we're great. Hey, want to thank everybody contributing on the content side, but more importantly, right, the folks that joined us today in the session. This session and most of our sessions are coming from you guys. So please shoot us a note. Let us know what you're interested in hearing next. We do these monthly. We've already got something teed up for January. Larry's group's doing other stuff, and we'll make sure that you folks get information about that webinar coming up. But we'd love to hear about what topics interest you, what workshops can we build here for our CDW customers to help them to continue to drive more out of ServiceNow. We focus first on what you guys own already on the platform and the other technologies in your organization. And then we advise if there are things that would provide powerful ROI for you guys, to continue that investment. We share that as well. So thanks so much, and excited about at the year end here, covering a topic as critical and timely as this, and look forward to rolling into next year. Reach out to us if you'd like to have that one-on-one kind of workshop discussion with us. And again, a special thanks to Ryan Foster of ServiceNow for being a great partner on this journey with us all.
Thanks, John. Thanks, CDW
Thanks,
team.
everyone.